What happens when a simple invitation turns into a night that quietly rewrites what connection can feel like? Imagine walking into what you think is an ordinary evening. Drinks, conversation, a familiar friend, and walking out with a memory that refuses to fade. This isn't just a story. It's a journey into one of those rare moments where comfort, trust, and unexpected intensity collide. Before I start, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Are you in a small town where the evenings fall slow and gentle, or in a city where the lights never quite go dark? Wherever you are, I'm willing to bet there's a place nearby, a backyard, a field, a corner of a park, that holds memories the way the one I'm about to tell you about holds mine. Hit subscribe. Some moments are too meaningful to keep to yourself. 2. It started with a message that looked completely harmless. A few people over at my place tonight, just talking music. You'll like them, Ryan wrote. Ryan had been my friend for years. The kind of friend who remembered your coffee order and your worst day at work, and somehow knew when you needed a distraction before you did. I'd had a long week, the kind that leaves your bones tired and your mind restless. I stared at his text, hesitated for a beat, and finally typed, "Okay, I'll come by." When I stepped into the elevator that went straight up to his loft, I didn't know I was being carried toward a night I'd remember in more detail than some entire years of my life. Ryan met me at the door with that familiar half grin. "Perfect timing," he said, his hand resting lightly at the small of my back as he guided me in. The touch was casual, but it anchored me instantly. The loft was softly lit. The city spread out behind the floor-to-ceiling windows like a sea of scattered jewels. The hum of quiet music filled the space, wrapped around the clink of glass and the low murmur of voices. He pressed a drink into my hand. Ginger soda with a generous shot of something warm beneath it. Exactly what I always ordered when I didn't want anything too heavy. "You always know what I like," I teased. He gave a small shrug, eyes glinting. "I pay attention." Then he introduced me to the other two. First was Amir. He leaned against the sleek wooden counter, hands tucked into his pockets, posture relaxed without looking careless. There was a steadiness about him, like a dock you could tie your boat to in any weather and know it would hold. His smile was easy but not showy. When he spoke, his voice had a low, resonant quality that made you want to lean in, even when he was just saying something as simple as, "Nice to finally meet you. Ryan's talked about you." Or then there was Renee. Quieter, dark hair curling slightly at his neck, eyes that flicked up and took in more than his words gave away. He didn't say much at first. When he did, it was with the kind of careful honesty that makes you feel like everything you say is being handled with care. The 4 of us fell into a rhythm faster than I expected. Conversation came easily. There was laughter. Jokes passed back and forth like a well-rehearsed routine. Ryan told stories that filled the room with warmth and noise. Amir added dry, perfectly timed one-liners that had us tipping our heads back in laughter. And every so often, Renee would step in with a question or an observation that made the whole conversation turn and deepen for a moment, like a surprising note in a familiar song. There was an energy there I couldn't pretend not to feel. It wasn't just the drink sliding warmly through my chest. It was them, each of them, tugging at a different thread inside me. At some point, the banter took on a more playful edge. Ryan leaned forward, setting his glass down with a soft thud, that mischievous spark I knew too well lighting his eyes. "Let's make this interesting," he said. "No filters, no pretending, just truth." "Aren't you the ambitious one tonight?" Amir said, one brow raised, but he was already smiling. "Why not?" Ryan replied. "I'll start. What's the most daring thing you've ever done?" We went around the room. Stories spilled out. Amir admitted he'd signed up to perform at a local jazz bar open mic one night without warning, and actually followed through. Renee confessed he'd once grabbed his keys at 2 a.m. and driven for hours with no plan, just to see how far the road took him before sunrise. When it was my turn, all 3 of them looked at me. My hand tightened slightly around my glass. I gave a small, nervous laugh. "I don't think I've done anything particularly daring," I said. Amir's smile edged a little wider. "You look like someone who could surprise people, though." Orion leaned just a bit closer. "Wecker fix that," he murmured. The air shifted, not louder, not heavier, just charged. Then Rian dropped the question that slipped everything off its tracks. "If you could spend the entire night just talking with one person here, one-on-one, who would it be?" My heart picked up. They were still smiling, still teasing, but their eyes said they'd actually listened to my answer. I could feel 3 different possibilities, 3 different paths, hanging in the space between their glances. Instead of choosing, I heard myself say, almost flippantly, "Why not all 3? It was meant as a joke." That's what I told myself. But the way they looked at me after that, like a shared understanding had snapped into place, told me we had all heard something more. Ryan moved first. He stepped into that small gap between us and my glass, gently eased it out of my hand, and set it on the table. "You always did know how to raise the stakes," he said quietly, a softness in his voice I didn't expect. His hand lingered on mine for a moment longer than necessary. When his head tipped down, his words brushed my ear in a slow, warm murmur that felt less like conversation and more like an invitation. My breath hitched as I felt his other hand find the small of my back again, this time drawing me a fraction closer to him. Then I felt Amir behind me. His presence was like leaning back against a strong, silent wall. His palms came to rest on my shoulders, thumbs pressing lightly in a way that felt grounding, not demanding. "Don't worry," he said, voice low and reassuring near my ear. "We're not leaving you out here alone." His words carried more than one meaning. Over my shoulder, Ryan and Amir shared a look that lasted barely a heartbeat, but it said everything. And then René stepped into my line of sight. He didn't rush. He stood just in front of me, close enough that I could see the tiny flecks of color in his eyes. His gaze held a mix of tenderness and focus, like he was paying as much attention to how I felt as to anything else. His hand lifted and traced a slow, barely there line from just below my collarbone up along the side of my neck to my jaw. The touch was feather light, reverent, almost. For a moment, I forgot there was anyone else in the room. The cool air of the loft brushed my skin, but their combined warmth circled around me from 3 directions. Ryan's voice came beside me again, quiet and sure. "You have no idea how special you are, do you?" René's hands slid gently along my arms, not gripping, just resting, like he was reassuring every inch of me that I wasn't alone in this. Behind me, Amir let out a quiet, amused breath that somehow made me feel safer, not mocked. I found myself letting go in tiny increments. One exhale at a time, they led me toward the couch, not with a commanding shove but with soft, steady guidance. "Sit," Amir said gently. "Get comfortable." The cushions gave under my weight. For a second, lightheadedness flickered through me. I wasn't used to being the center of this much focused attention. Amir lowered himself beside me, one large hand resting just near my hip, not holding me there, but close enough that I could reach for it if I wanted reassurance. Ryan slid in behind me on the back cushion, his arm stretching easily along the top of the couch, his presence a warm line at my back. René settled on my other side, turning enough that his knee brushed lightly against my leg, his eyes never entirely leaving my face. He reached for the strap of my small bag, fingers grazing the skin at my shoulder as he slipped it off and set it gently on the table. His movements were slow, deliberate, like he respected the weight of every contact. "You're remarkable," Ryan whispered behind me. The way he said it sounded like a fact, not flattery. Amir's hand stayed still near mine, not pushing, just existing as a quiet offer of support. René's voice came next, low and certain as he spoke to me about who I was, not just what I looked like in that moment. His words landed with unexpected force, as if he'd been watching me for much longer than just tonight. Every touch, every sentence, every small adjustment felt like they were choosing care over spectacle. They weren't trying to dazzle me. They were trying to be there, with me, not just around me. Time blurred. Not in the sense that I lost track of what was happening. More like I stopped needing the clock's permission to be there. I could feel how each of them brought something different into the room. Amir's calm was like a heartbeat that refused to speed up even when mine did. René's emotion came through in the smallest details. The way he watched my reactions, The way his forehead rested against mine for a silent second that somehow said what words couldn't. Ryan's warmth wrapped around everything, adding a kind of lightness that kept it all from tipping into anything that felt like too much. At one point, my hands were trembling so slightly I thought no one would notice. Amir noticed. His fingers curled around mine, firm but gentle, matching my breathing to his pace until my shoulders loosened. Rennie leaned in then, his lips close to my temple as he spoke to me, not about the moment itself, but about all the ways I minimize my own worth when I talk about myself. "You deserved something just for you," he said softly. "Tonight you get that." The words made my throat tighten. Ryan's hand found mine where Amir's had held it, their fingers brushing, their energy somehow in sync without needing to discuss it. I felt everything, every word, every brush of skin, every shared look that unfolded over my shoulder as if I wasn't meant to see it, but was always meant to feel it. And then, there was a moment that didn't have a clear beginning. No one called attention to it. No one said, "This is it." I just suddenly realized my whole body was trembling, my breath coming out in stuttered bursts, my heart pounding somewhere between fear and release. It was like every fiber in me finally believed what had been slowly, carefully communicated all night: you are safe, you are held, you are allowed to feel. And I did. It wasn't just one emotion, it was a flood. Gratitude, relief, wonder, a sense of being seen so completely that it almost hurt, but in the way a long, closed muscle hurts when it finally stretches. I let go in that moment more fully than I had in years. Not of control. Of the story that I didn't deserve this kind of tenderness. Too, the rest of the night unfolded almost like an exhale that never quite ended. There was more talking than anything else. Laughter that came quieter now, but deeper. Stories that had nothing to do with impressing anyone, and everything to do with revealing the small, fragile truths under our usual armor. Hours later, we ended up tangled together on the couch. Not in some messy, chaotic way. Just comfortably interwoven. Amir leaned back, one arm loose around my shoulders, his breathing slow and steady, that constant solidity still there, even in the quiet. On my other side, Rennie traced light, aimless patterns on my forearm with his fingertips. Every so often, he glanced at me with a look that combined admiration and something like relief, like he'd been holding his own breath about the night and had finally let it out. Ryan sat at the end of the couch, one hand resting easily on my leg. His eyes were on the skyline, but his touch made it clear his mind wasn't far from where we sat. "That," he said finally, breaking the comfortable silence, "was worth every second of waiting." Amir let out a low chuckle. I don't think any of us would argue with that. I smiled, my chest still rising and falling a little more deeply than usual, the edges of everything inside me humming with a new awareness. "I don't think I've ever had a night like this," I admitted. Rennie leaned down and brushed a kiss against my temple, gentle, almost reverent. "You deserved one," he said simply. No performance, no grand speech, just that. We stayed there like that long after the city lights dimmed slightly and the music faded to the softest background note. 4 people in one room, sharing a quiet glow that felt too real to be an accident. 2 the next morning, walking home through streets that felt strangely unchanged. I carried something invisible with me. It wasn't about 3 men. It wasn't about a loft or a city or a couch. It was about being placed, intentionally, carefully, at the center of someone else's focus. Of 3 someones, and learning that being held like that, emotionally, mentally, almost spiritually, didn't mean losing myself. It meant finding a part of myself I'd quietly convinced I'd never get to meet. Now it's your turn. Have you ever had a night that didn't just thrill you, but shifted you? A moment so raw, so honest, that it transformed how you saw yourself, or others, or what connection can really feel like. Share your story in the comments. Anonymous or not, big or small, your truth might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this story resonated with you, tap like, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. Because the most powerful moments aren't always the loudest ones. Sometimes, they're the quiet nights you never saw coming, that you end up carrying with you for the rest of your life.